The anime begins by showing a pharmacist named Kanji Yakutani, who is busy working in a room in the molecular pharmacy laboratory. Yakutani pursued the pharmaceutical field and succeeded in developing the best research in the world. The reason for Yakutani to pursue this field is because his sister died when she was a child due to the tumor she was suffering from, which could not be completely removed. The young Yakutani knew about this and was determined to develop research related to molecular pharmacy to cure patients suffering from diseases like his late sister. Furthermore, because Yakutani is a regular person, he keeps track of his hours. After an hour of work, he decided to take a short break and set the alarm so he wouldn't wake up too late. However, when the alarm went off, he did not wake up because he had died from being too tired from work. Not long after, when Yakutani opened his eyes, he saw a maidservant named Charlotte Solar, or Lot. Lot, who called Yakutani as young master, realized that he was still in pain from being struck by lightning, so she asked him to lie down. After looking around at his body, he realized that he had been reincarnated into a boy named Pharma de Medicis. When Lot knew Pharma didn't recognize her, she reintroduced herself. After that, she helped Pharma remove the bandages and was very surprised to see a mark on his arm. Lot said that the mark was similar to the holy sign of the god of Yakusin or the god of healing. However, Pharma denied it and said the mark was just a burn from a lightning strike. In an alley in the Pharma residence, Lot explains to him that she serves the de Medicis family, one of the top noble families in the San-Fleuve Empire, who is known to have worked as the empire's pharmacist centuries ago. His father, Mr. Bruno de Medicis, was a nobleman with the title of Archduke and the principal of the Imperial Pharmacy School. When she sees a row of photos of the de Medicis family in the hallway, Lot tells Pharma that his mother's name is Beatrice and his younger sister's name is Blanche. Lot said that Pharma's older brother, Pal, is currently studying at the Novet-Louvre Pharmacy University, the world's most famous university quite far from their home. As a father, Bruno wanted his children not only to be able to master pharmacy science but to be able to use the sacred technique, a magical technique that is a gift from the gods. Apart from losing his memory, it turns out that Pharma doesn't even remember the holy technique he has, namely the holy water technique. Lot, who knew about this, was surprised because Pharma had mastered the holy water technique before that. She had told him that if he did not master the sacred technique, he would be stripped of his peerage and kicked out of the house. After that, Pharma returned to his room and attempted to practice what Lot taught him to use sacred techniques. Shortly after, it was seen that the markings on his arm showed a reaction after he followed all of Lot's instructions, and he was finally able to spit out water from his hands. However, Pharma didn't know how to stop the running water, so he pointed his hand toward the garden outside the window. The running of water finally stopped after he accidentally said stop. Afterward, he tried to extract other substances from his hands and realized that he could create substances with simple compounds from his left hand while his right hand could make them disappear. This can happen only when Pharma knows the chemical structure of these substances. At the de Medicis family residence library, Lot is seen accompanying Pharma and informs that he had memorized all the books because Bruno specifically asked him to study medicine when he was young. Hearing that, Pharma tried to restore his memory while reading the book in front of him. In the evening, Pharma's family had been waiting for him in the dining room, where they were visibly worried about his condition after being struck by lightning. Soon after, Bruno asked Pharma how to make a georite ointment to treat his hands. Luckily, Lot had previously warned that Bruno usually asked his children about medicines when they were having dinner. Therefore, Pharma can answer it correctly. Hearing his answer, Bruno felt relieved because his son's knowledge of medicine had not been lost. Bruno then informs that Pharma can continue his studies with Eleanor the next day. Eleanor, or as she is usually called Ellen, was formerly Bruno's best student and is now Pharma's personal teacher. The next day, Ellen was very surprised when Pharma called her Miss Eleanor, even though he usually casually called her Ellen. However, after she found out that Pharma was struck by lightning which caused some of his memory to be lost, Ellen finally understood. That day, Ellen would teach Pharma about the sacred techniques. She explained that nobles usually had the talent to use sacred techniques from birth and had their own guardian gods. The guardian god of Pharma, Pal, and Bruno are the Yakusin god of healing, while Ellen has the guardian god of Shuisin or water god. It turned out that sacred techniques have 5 elements: fire, water, air, earth, and non-element, divided into positive and negative elements. Hearing this, Pharma asked Ellen about someone who could create a certain substance whose elements were very different from the element he controlled. She replied that someone couldn't do this because everyone was born with certain elements that could not be replaced. If someone could use such an ability, it was likely that person was a god or a monster. Pharma was surprised to hear his teacher's explanation. Ellen then took Pharma to the lakeside to continue practicing and realized that he didn't bring his holy staff that could increase the power of the sacred techniques. Soon after, Ellen lent him a cane so that practice could begin. Afterward, Ellen demonstrated how to create a water spear from a holy staff. Shortly after, she asked Pharma to create a water spear according to her instructions. She told him to imagine the form of his sacred technique while chanting. Unexpectedly, Pharma's strength was so great that it even surpassed his teacher's. Ellen was amazed and did not expect to find that Pharma did not cast a spell when creating the holy spear. Ellen took out a stick to measure his strength and asked him to hold it. Soon after, the wand shatters and is discolored as Pharma's strength seems to be greater than the stick's detectable strength. Not only that, the staff's attributes could not indicate negative or positive elements because no one had ever exceeded the power measurement limit of the holy power measuring stick. After that, Ellen tried to examine Pharma's body and how shocked she was after seeing the sacred mark of the Yakusan god on her arm. She forbids him from holding the holy power measuring stick in front of other people, even in front of his father. Hearing that, Pharma agreed to keep it a secret. On the way back to their respective residences, Pharma and Ellen took a break while sitting on a park bench. Then he asked Ellen to make binoculars using her fingers because she was not wearing her glasses. When Ellen tried, it turned out that she could see clearly through the small holes made by her fingers. Meanwhile, Pharma, who practiced this, could see a blue mark on one of Ellen's sprained fingers. After she asked about her sprained finger and touched it, Ellen wondered how Pharma could know when her finger looked normal. When Pharma tried to look back at Ellen's finger through his binoculars, it was seen that the wound on her sprained finger had suddenly turned white. Pharma frankly told his teacher that the affected part of the body looks blue in binoculars, and when analyzing the cause, the color turns white. Then he asked if it was a sacred technique or not. Ellen only explained that God Yakusan knows all diseases and provides medicine for them. Ellen thought Pharma couldn't have the power of the Yakusan god Eye because that power could only be exercised by a god. She suddenly became hysterical when she realized that Pharma had no shadow. Ellen, who was afraid, left him alone. The next morning at Pharma's family residence, Bruno told Pharma that Ellen asked permission not to teach because of a high fever. She even asked him to stop teaching him. Bruno, astonished by Ellen's request, asked Pharma to explain whether he knew why his teacher did that. Pharma replied that he did not know her reasons, even though he remembered the incident the previous day, which shocked her and scared her away. Shortly after, Bruno asked Pharma to deliver potions and letters to Ellen. Before he sent it off, he returned to the room, looked at the potion recipe his father had given him, and saw that the potion's properties were nothing more than an ordinary nutritional drink. Arriving at Ellen's house, Pharma gave her a letter from her father and a fever-reducing concoction that he had reconcocted from her father's recipe. Apart from that, he gave her an ointment for her sprained finger. Ellen, who is still afraid of him, thinks that Pharma gave her poison because she knows his secrets. Pharma made it clear he wanted Ellen to remain as his tutor. Hearing this, Ellen was surprised and said that he did not need to study sacred techniques and medicine because he was the reincarnation of the Yakusan god. But then, Ellen finally agreed to remain a Pharma teacher after he explained that in the de Medicis family library, there was nothing about sacred techniques, so he wanted to be guided by Ellen because he didn't know how to control his powers. The next day, Ellen, who returned to teach Pharma, seemed to have recovered and returned to be healthy. Before starting her class, Ellen thanked him because the ointment and bitter medicine from him were very effective in treating her illness. She was frank and admitted that Bruno's medicine was not effective. After that, she invites Pharma to go to an uninhabited island because she has to be on guard if his powers cannot be controlled. Arriving on the island, the training began, and as expected, Pharma's strength exceeded expectations. At the same time, Ellen, who had started to trust him, was seen not wearing armor anymore. Even though his power had not been properly controlled, Ellen continued practicing until Pharma could perfectly master his sacred techniques. When Pharma returns home from practice, he is greeted by his maid, Madeline. With his divine eyes, he could tell that Madeline had reflux esophagitis. Not only her, Pharma saw all his maids with those divine eyes and knew that they were suffering from a certain disease. Pharma muttered that his existence in this world was an oddity. Besides having no shadow, he has special powers that make him a target for kidnapping or assassination. After seeing all his maids' ailments, Pharma began to concoct medicine. After the concoction medicine was finished, he gave the potion he made to Lot and told her how to use it. Soon after, Lot looked happy and intended to share the potion with her mother, who had dry and rough skin due to too much exposure to water. Then he made medicine for the other maids after seeing their condition one by one. When Pharma gave medicine to Madeline, he didn't expect her would cry and thank him very much. Pharma just found out that the servants never got their master's medicine. Lot explained that Bruno was the pharmacist for the nobles, so he didn't care about maids like Pharma. Hearing Lot's explanation, Pharma looked saddened at the thought that social level influenced a person's medicine intake. Even with the knowledge that is still limited, surely there are still a few effective drugs. Not to mention the many commoners who couldn't afford medicine, so they had to rely on the shaman, which caused the death rate to be high. Because of that, he was determined to give medicine to everyone in need. A few days later, Pharma asked where his little sister was, who had not joined the dinner table. It turns out that Blanche is suffering from chicken pox, so Bruno orders them to stay away from her for 3 weeks so they don't catch it. After explaining to his family, Bruno took his leave due to an emergency call, even though he appeared to be coughing and feeling unwell. Soon after, Pharma prepared a medicine for his younger sister, and he secretly entered Blanche's room and checked on her condition. Seeing him coming, Blanche was afraid that he would be scolded by their father. He replied that that was the reason he had come secretly. Shortly after Pharma gave Blanche the medicine, his younger sister refused because the medicine was bitter. However, he tries to persuade her by mixing his bitter medicine with the macaroon so that she will eat the medicine. Blanche, surprised because her older brother had brought her medicine, said that Bruno had told her that there was no cure for her illness. Hearing that, Pharma looked shocked, and then he reasoned that the drug was in the newest book, and because they were busy, maybe their father didn't have time to read it. Because of this, Pharma asked Blanche to keep the drug private. He forbids her from scratching her skin and says that the virus will spread if the skin is scratched. Blanche wondered whether the virus was because people were unfamiliar with the concept of viruses or bacteria in her world. Pharma explained that the virus is a kind of invisible little evil spirit. Blanche frankly said that her older brother had changed from before. Previously, he never wanted to accompany his younger sister to play. Even, he had never fed her. That's why she now loves her current older brother. Hearing that, Pharma fell silent because he remembered his little sister from his past life. Several days later, Bruno did not expect that Blanche would recover so quickly. In the evening, Pharma appears in the dispensing room and feels he has gotten too much power as an ordinary human. He could create and dispel matter, diagnose diseases through his left-hand circle, and see something bigger than his right-hand circle. Pharma had no idea that he wondered if it was because he had died before. Soon after, he finally completed the creation of a single micro-lens that can be used to see small things larger without using the strength of his right hand. Even though it was impossible to see a virus that was so small, he could show Blanche bacteria with it. When Pharma was about to meet Blanche to show the device, her father suddenly called and told him to get ready to leave because there was an emergency call from the Imperial Palace informing him of the Queen's sudden deteriorating health condition. Pharma, who saw his father still coughing, tried to see his father's illness with his divine eyes. However, his attempt failed because Bruno suddenly turned to look at him just as he was about to use his power. In the Imperial Palace, a healer named Claude appears, who is anxious and tells Bruno that the Queen's lungs are continuing to weaken. It can be seen that many people have gathered in the room to find out the health condition of Queen Elizabeth II. After Bruno entered the Queen's room, Pharma followed and watched his father's inspection. Seeing that Bruno could make anesthetic potions, Pharma was quite surprised by his father's shrewdness, who now asked the Queen to inhale the drug. Pharma knew that the drugs did not affect the Queen's illness, or perhaps the drugs were just to ease her pain. He had heard Claude telling someone to call the priest because tomorrow might be the Queen's last day. However, he thought it was just a ritual to ease the Queen's death, as no one seemed to want to heal her. Finally, Pharma used his board's eye to see Queen's illness, which turned out to be lung cancer, or what is commonly called white death. Because there is no syringe to insert the medicine, the only available option is to take medicine by mouth. The concoction of the medicine for white death turned out to be quite complex, making it difficult for Pharma to accurately visualize it because if it failed, the Queen's life would be at stake. While thinking about all these things, Pharma was suddenly surprised by the arrival of Louis, the Queen's son, who looked sad to see his mother, who had not yet recovered. Seeing that sadness, Pharma couldn't stop his intention to heal her, so he walked over to her and respectfully asked permission to heal her because he had a new medicine for her illness. Bruno, who heard this, ordered Pharma to step down because no one could heal the Queen. However, his action was prevented by the Queen, who allowed Pharma to heal her. In a locked room, Pharma starts preparing to mix the medicine while Bruno keeps banging on the door, forcing his son to give up his efforts to save the Queen. An annoyed Bruno then uses his magic to break down the door. When he entered, Bruno scolded Pharma, who was concocting medicine. Bruno already knows that the Queen has white death, which makes Pharma acknowledge his father's prowess in diagnosing the disease without the help of a divine eye like himself. Bruno reminds Pharma that white death patients cannot be cured, making them suffer a lot. However, he insisted on dispensing the drug and said his father should take the drug. Bruno, who was getting more emotional, then used his stick and got ready to attack. However, Pharma tries to calm his father down as he doesn't want Bruno to destroy the room. Suddenly, Bruno attacked him, but with the power he had, Pharma was able to create the magical barrier, which surprised Bruno because his son did not use a stick or cast spells to create the barrier. Pharma then gave his notebook to Bruno while explaining that it was the new knowledge he had dreamed of when lightning struck him. Bruno checks the book and notices a sacred symbol on Pharma's arm. Then he believed that his son had received a revelation from the Yakusan god. Pharma explained that if the concoction of the drug was successful, he would want to raise his father's good name in the palace. However, Bruno refused this, and he taught that Pharma should be able to take responsibility for his own concoction because the Queen had risked her life to trust him. That is the responsibility and pride of a pharmacist. Eventually, Pharma removed his walls and made his father realize that his son had a positive water element. Pharma, who had finished concocting the medicine, entered the Queen's room wearing a muzzle. Claude, who saw this, approached him and tried to block him. When the Queen saw him blocking Pharma, she scolded Claude and asked Pharma to give her the medicine. On the other hand, Claude went to Bruno and asked if he didn't try to prevent his son. Bruno calmly replied that he believed in his son's abilities that might have surpassed them all. Before Pharma explained the effects of the concoction, he wanted to show a sample of Queen's sputum using a microscope-like device he made. The Queen looked surprised to see it, then asked to see the creature and the tool. Pharma explained that it was a small organism that caused the White Death. The creature is a bacterium that has infected the Queen. If the medicine is taken regularly for 6 months, then she might be able to recover completely. Pharma then asked the Queen to take medicine, and from that day on, he would directly supervise her to take medicine every day. He said that he was ready to risk his life for her recovery. A moment later, Pharma informed everyone that if the new drug proved successful, then White Death could be cured. So, they no longer need to fear the disease. The people there seemed enthusiastic to hear his explanation and asked him to explain the matter in detail. Some even praised his sacred technique as extraordinary for making a single microlens. Hearing that, Pharma explained that it wasn't a holy technique but that it could be easily made. He was willing to share his design with them. On the way home, Bruno occasionally glanced at his son. He realized that he kept telling Pharma to always have a conscience for each of his patients, but he had never done the same for his son. Even he didn't know what his son thought and felt every day. After receiving the drug concoction from Pharma, Bruno thanked and praised his son for his extraordinary abilities. Pharma, whom his father praised, said that although his knowledge was broad, he did not know how to deal with dying patients like his father. Because of that, as someone who pursued pharmaceutical and medical sciences, Pharma asked his father to continue to guide him. Bruno, who seemed touched by his son's words, agreed to his request. 3 months after the palace summons, Bruno told Pharma that a representative from Nova Louvre University had come to their house and asked the de Medicis family to publish the prescription for the White Death medicine that he had found. Bruno then made excuses for the representatives from the university to go home because he was sure that the drug was a miracle from the Yakusan god so that it didn't need to be taught to other people. However, Pharma turned out to have a different opinion. Pharma had said that the medicine could be made without using sacred techniques and that one day, he would publish the method of manufacture. His father was surprised to hear that. Pharma said valuable knowledge must be shared with everyone. That way, he is sure that new discoveries will emerge in the pharmaceutical and medical fields that can benefit everyone. Furthermore, Pharma explained that it was just his principle as a pharmacist, and he did not deny that everyone has different principles. Bruno said that Pharma's insight and principles were a threat to some people, and as a father, he thought that someone would want to get rid of Pharma. Of course, it's not just pharmacists who want to get rid of Pharma, but certain individuals who deliberately bring White Death to the palace. Bruno explains that he got information about people who wanted to replace the Queen's position in the empire, so they devised a plan by spreading the disease in the palace. However, Pharma wasn't sure about that because the chance of the disease developing was only 10%. When Pharma arrived at the palace, Prince Noah cheerfully greeted him and invited him to follow him for a while. In an alley in the palace, in a whisper, Prince Noah informs that the Queen has prepared a gift for Pharma soon. Prince Noah again asks what gift Pharma wants. Innocently, he simply replied that he didn't want anything. Hearing this, Prince Noah calls him stupid because Pharma can ask for money, titles, or territory. He said that Pharma should not hesitate to tell him if he wants something in the future. Thinking about the future, Pharma finally tells Prince Noah that he wants to open a pharmacy that provides safe and cheap medicines for everyone, regardless of social status. In the Queen's room, after her routine of taking medicine from Pharma, she praised his new medicine, which was efficacious because her condition was getting better. Pharma then said that humans cannot predict the future and that no medicine can cure disease. Suddenly the Queen said that Pharma's words contrasted with what he said when he gave a speech in front of Claude and the royal physicians. Hearing that, Pharma just smiled. He said such optimistic things at the time so she would feel confident about being cured. Pharma then encouraged the Queen by saying that her son, Prince Louis, really needed her and that many admired and needed her to lead the empire in this kingdom. Pharma added that as long as people were loyal to her, her existence was still very precious. Hearing that, the Queen smiled while praising Pharma's words. He said he was sure she could live a better life and appreciate every day she passed. However, the Queen looked confused by the meaning of his words, but he didn't explain and left her room. Several months later, Bruno congratulates the Queen, who has recovered. She summoned him because she had something she wanted to talk about Pharma. The next day, Bruno brings Pharma to attend the Empire's grand ceremony. It turned out that they received an award from the Queen because Bruno had contributed to taking care of her so far and his dedication to training the next generation of pharmacists. Bruno received an area called Mercer as a reward for his services to the Empire. The Queen advised Bruno to continue his research in the pharmaceutical field. After that, she summoned Pharma and formally made him the pharmacist of the Empire while flashing a badge. Not only that, but the Queen specifically allowed him to set up a pharmacy in the imperial capital. The next day, Pharma is surprised by the arrival of the Queen's envoys who will help him build an apothecary. Even though he wasn't ready, the Queen had ordered them to build the pharmacy that day. Shortly after, Ellen arrives there because Bruno has invited her to help Pharma build a pharmacy. She started asking about his plans regarding the pharmacy he wanted. Pharma, who has not yet decided on the design and concept of the pharmacy he wants to establish, only said he wanted to think about it more while visiting various pharmacies. However, one of the Queen's envoys, John, tells Pharma that the pharmacy must be built as he wants, or they will get into trouble if he doesn't give instructions. Eventually, sketches of the apothecary building began to be drawn, and Ellen said that the Queen would allow it to be rebuilt if Pharma didn't like the sketch later. A few days later, it was seen that the pharmacy building was almost finished when John thanked Pharma because his detailed plans really helped their work to be completed quickly. John then asked for the name of Pharma's dispensary. Originally, Pharma considered naming his pharmacy Demeticis, but he didn't want to overtly adopt the family name. However, it can't be denied that he is pleased that his dream of building his own pharmacy has come true, even though he didn't expect it to be in another world instead. John heard Pharma's mumbling and thought he had named it the Other World Pharmacy, so he called a sign maker to imprint the name. A few days later, when Ellen came to see the pharmacy, which now has a sign in front of it, she praised Pharma on behalf of the pharmacy. However, he denied it and said that the name resulted from a misunderstanding. Ellen calmed down and said that if the name of the pharmacy caught people's attention, and no matter what name Pharma chose, opening a pharmacy would not prevent him from clashing with the pharmacists' union. Not long after, a middle-aged man who looked like he came from a wealthy family visited a pharmacy and asked who owned the pharmacy. Pharma finally replied that he was the owner. After that, he asked about the man's need to visit his pharmacy. The man then introduced himself as Veron and said he was the head of the Sanefield Pharmacist Union. Pharma politely introduced himself as the royal pharmacist and came from the Demeticis family. Then Vernon satirized him by saying that the pharmacy could only sell candy because he was still very young. Ellen, who heard Veron's words, looked very annoyed and seemed ready to fight. Seeing his teacher's attitude, Pharma tried to calm Ellen and smiled at Veron while answering if he would sell throat tablets with a substance similar to candy. Pharma, who knows that Veron doesn't like the building of his pharmacy, asks if he should join the guild if he wants to open a pharmacy. Veron replied that the guild didn't accept members of the nobility, but he would consider it if Pharma wanted to join. He reasoned that his guild didn't sell expensive drugs like Pharma would. Pharma denied this and said that he would sell the drug at a low price. Ellen, fed up with Veron's words, was finally annoyed and told him to be honest if he wanted to destroy the Pharma store because she was ready to fight him. Veron reasoned that he had only come to say hello. Shortly after finishing his words, he left the venue. When at home, Pharma is still thinking about the person who will take care of the finances at the pharmacy. In the afternoon, Blanche and the maids are sad because Cedric decided to retire because he wanted to heal his knee. Actually, Cedric still wanted to work at the house, but his knee condition was no longer possible. Knowing that he would still want to work if his knees were healthy, Pharma asked him to work in his pharmacy as an accountant. After that, he asked his father to allow Cedric to work with him at the pharmacy because Cedric's background was in accounting. Hearing that, Bruno agreed to his son's request and called Simon to bring a gift to Pharma, which turned out to be a chest of gold as initial capital for building his own pharmacy. After several days, Pharma's pharmacy was finally inaugurated. Some people who don't like the existence of the pharmacy say that they just want to play around by wasting their parents' money to open them. A month after opening the pharmacy, the results did not meet Pharma's expectations. Ellen said that commoners usually went to a pharmacy devoted to commoners. Meanwhile, the nobles would usually summon a healer to their home. Then Pharma began to think about how to lure people to visit his pharmacy. At the same time, Lot suddenly came while telling a piece of good news. To find out what the residents thought about Pharma's pharmacy, she collected a questionnaire she shared when chatting with them. Lot then announced the survey results she had conducted to 100 residents of the imperial capital. The first thing that made the citizens hesitant to visit Pharma's pharmacy was the imperial crest prominently displayed on the front of the pharmacy, which apparently frightened many people. Besides that, the residents didn't know how to talk to nobles for fear of being scolded by them. Then some said they didn't have the proper clothes to come to the noble's shop, even though Pharma didn't care about that. Then, the guard at the door turned out to be quite scary and scared the residents. And lastly, they didn't feel confident about buying medicine at a pharmacy because the owner was a 10-year-old boy. Soon after, Cedric suggests displaying drug prices and inspection fees specifically at the front of the store. But Lot said that some residents can't read, so they have to think again about ways to attract customers and improve service. An old man named James, the first customer at the pharmacy, came back to visit the pharmacy and bought 3 sea candies. James, who has been to the pharmacy several times, makes Pharma curious and wonders if he is a sailor because he always buys sea candy which functions to prevent scabies and contains vitamin C needed by sailors. Hearing this question, James did not answer and instead left, saying he had an appointment with someone else. Not long after, Pharma came out of the pharmacy and accidentally saw James, who was together talking with several people. Pharma was surprised by the appearance of his parents, who disguised themselves wearing masks because they wanted to visit his pharmacy in person. Bruno then asked permission to look around the pharmacy, and Pharma enthusiastically accompanied and explained to his parents. On the first floor is an area for selling medicines, a room for dispensing medicines, and a waiting room for customers. Then, the second floor is a treatment and rest room for patients with 4 beds and 1 isolation room with bathroom facilities. On the third floor, there is an employee room to rest equipped with a kitchen, while the fourth floor is used for the laboratory, where Pharma develops drugs. Bruno commented that the pharmacy was quite good and asked about the customers because he did not see any nobles, merchants, or commoners coming. Pharma said frankly that they were thinking of ways to attract consumers so that they feel comfortable buying drugs there. Then Beatrice suggests that Pharma sell cosmetics to nobles. If the cosmetics were well known among the nobility and could be purchased at a relatively low price, commoners would also wear them. Hearing his mother's advice, Pharma asked what cosmetics the nobles usually used. Beatrice replied that she had always been interested in using cosmetic products that could beautify the skin with a fragrant and long-lasting scent. Bruno then suggested that Pharma not sell bleaching powder because it contains dangerous metals such as white lead and mercuric chloride and can be inhaled through the mouth and nose, so people must be very careful when using it. In the middle of their conversation, a man came to the pharmacy and told them that a noble girl named Chloe had suddenly fainted. Hearing this, Pharma rushed to check it out. Arriving at the place, Pharma told Chloe's maid that he was the palace pharmacist and was finally allowed to enter the horse carriage where she was resting. With his divine eyes, Pharma could tell that Chloe was not suffering from any illness and that her current condition was caused by several cuts on her arm, which had started to become infected. Finally, Pharma told her maid that Chloe did not suffer from any illness but was just weak because she had just done the bloodletting method. Hearing that, Chloe couldn't believe it because a trusted healer had done it. Pharma again explained that if she was bleeding even though she was not suffering from a disease with a large number of incisions, of course, this could cause an infection. Arriving at the pharmacy, Chloe, the daughter of the Marquis de Chatelain, a well-known businessman in the capital, frankly said that she had been rejected by the man she liked because he said he liked white girls. Chloe thought the man would say he likes her when her skin is whiter, so she is determined to do the bloodletting method. Pharma tells her that excessive bleeding can be life-threatening. He gave syrup to recover from anemia and medicine for the infection while explaining that the medicine should be taken 3 times a day, namely morning, afternoon, and evening. Not to forget, Pharma advised Chloe to stop using whitening powder because it could endanger her health. While crying, she replied that she couldn't do it because she always wanted to look beautiful in front of the man she liked. Then Lot suggested Pharma do something for Chloe, and finally, he remembered a powder foundation that can whiten the skin and has a safe ingredient. He said he would help Chloe and asked her to visit the pharmacy in 1 week. A few days later, Pharma surprised everyone in the pharmacy because his face was so white. He turns out to be testing a powder he made for Chloe. The cosmetics that he makes are safe for health. It does not contain lead or mercury compounds because it was made from natural ingredients and are good for the skin. Curious, Ellen asked about lead and mercury. Pharma explained that the whitening powder currently available contains lead and mercury, which are very harmful to the body. If the 2 ingredients are too absorbed by the body, it can damage the nerve tissue or kidneys. Then Pharma plans to inform the queen about the dangers of such cosmetics. 1 week later, Chloe returned to the pharmacy to get her cosmetics. Pharma asked her to wash her face first, then apply moisturizer and whitening powder. At first, Chloe was a bit surprised because the powder wasn't the powder she used to use. Pharma then explained that he deliberately made it like a cream so that it was easy to apply to the skin, which could prevent sunburn. The content of titanium oxide in the cream can reflect UV rays. After applying the cream, Ellen helped Chloe apply the loose powder, and she was amazed because the loose powder made her face glisten. Pharma made the powder so that the wearer's face looked white and glistening like snow in the morning sun. Fortunately, Chloe really liked the product. Not only that, Pharma recommends that she clean her face, which has been using makeup all day, with a makeup remover that contains ingredients to nourish the skin. If she regularly uses it, her skin can be whiter even when she doesn't apply powder. Chloe, who was very satisfied with all the products provided by Pharma, then thanked him. A few days later, Pharma began promoting its cosmetics to the public. Lot brought a basket of his cosmetics and started promoting them to people. She confirmed that the latest cosmetics were very popular among the nobility and explained that these cosmetics were skincare products that could whiten and nourish the skin at affordable prices. Some women became interested in these cosmetics and bought them. Not only that, in the cosmetic packages sold by Pharma, there are picture guides that are easy to understand, so those who cannot read can use them. After Pharma's cosmetic sales were very successful and well known among the public, eventually, many people started buying medicines and cosmetics at Pharma's otherworldly pharmacy because it provided products frequently used by nobles at relatively low prices. In fact, because of the large number of buyers who come, Chloe often doesn't get her cosmetics because these products have sold out. Pharma apologized and stated that their production could not keep up with the number of requests. Chloe then suggested Pharma set up an independent subsidiary for cosmetics. She said she is willing to finance setting up the company and recruiting pharmacists, but the company remains Pharma's property. It turned out that Cedric was willing to help the administration to establish his subsidiary. Hearing that explanation, Pharma finally agreed. After a few days had passed, the second branch of the otherworldly pharmacy named Medique, which specialized in producing cosmetics, had been formed, which surprised Pharma quite a bit as the process was extremely fast. Chloe has even recruited the best, most experienced, and medically knowledgeable female pharmacists whose contracts ended because they had to give birth. It turned out that the female pharmacists were unable to work again after giving birth, so they felt honored to be able to return to work. One day, the de Medicis family decided to go to Mercia, the territory that the Queen had given to Bruno and Pharma for successfully curing her. Mercia was a famous trading port used as the gateway to the empire. This place is the largest producer of herbal plants, which is very important for a pharmacist. Bruno and his men are currently discussing trade accounting reports for the last 5 years. One of his men told him about an East Indian cargo company from the Netherlands Kingdom that was cheating to avoid collecting taxes. Hearing the report, Bruno instructed his subordinates to discuss it with the company so that shipping rates were lowered and goods could be delivered more easily. While the meeting was still going on, Pharma suddenly entered the meeting room to meet his father. His father's assistant, who saw him, suggested he visit the famous Mercia beach, which is very beautiful. Hearing this, Pharma said goodbye to go to the beach after his father told him not to swim in the sea alone. Arriving at the beach, Pharma sees Blanche playing sand with Lot. Then they asked him for permission to swim in the sea. However, he forbade them to swim in the sea because his father had warned him. Hearing this, Blanche begged her brother to allow her to swim and promised not to swim too far from the beach. Seeing her sister's pitiful expression, he finally agreed, which made her leave happily. When Pharma was walking on the beach, unexpectedly, he saw Ellen preparing to swim in the sea. After that, he sits on the beach looking at Blanche, which reminds him of his little sister from the past who used to swim in the sea every year. He remembers the time when his little sister was angry because she couldn't swim in the sea because of her illness. Suddenly, Pharma snapped out of waves. He rushed to swim after Blanche, who was dragged farther and farther. But as Blanche was further away, Pharma panicked and screamed, causing a strange power to emerge from within him. He accidentally creates a dry land in the middle of the ocean to save her. Miraculously, it seemed like the seawater was being held back and formed a barrier to keep them from drowning. Ellen, who happened to be there after chasing Pharma, seemed so amazed by Pharma's power. After successfully bringing Blanche to the beach, Pharma, who was worried for his little sister, saw her condition using his divine eyes. Luckily, Blanche didn't drink much water. Still amazed, Ellen asked him about this power, but Pharma didn't understand. He feels guilty for allowing Blanche to swim in the sea, but Ellen comforts him, saying he did a great job saving Blanche. At night, Pharma was pensive because he remembered the time when he intended to remove the seawater molecules. If he was just a little late, he could eliminate Blanche and Ellen, who had water molecules in their bodies. He thought it was normal for people to fear his unreasonable strength. Seeing that Pharma wasn't sleeping, Lot asked if he needed anything. Pharma answered that he didn't need anything and told her to sleep. However, she found the courage to ask Pharma about the incident on the beach. Pharma then said he wanted Lot not to be afraid of him after seeing his holy technique. He apparently saw a very scared Lot on the beach after she saw his strength. Lot, who felt guilty, apologized and said that his holy technique was extraordinary and bravely helped Blanche, even though she should be helping Blanche, not him. However, Pharma justified Lot's actions because he knew Lot could not swim. He said he was happy that Lot was staying on the beach and not endangering herself. Even though Blanche was his favorite little sister, he had considered Lot as precious as her family. Hearing that, Lot was very touched by his words, and she was grateful because she felt that Pharma had saved her. In a church, a man named Solomon was seen who was surprised to hear a report from his colleague who said that there was a boy without a shadow who could erase seawater without a stick. They learned the news from an orphanage in Mercia that saw what happened. At first, they didn't take the boy's story seriously until a few days later, an orphanage caretaker went to the location and found the remains of an unusual sacred technique. After that, Solomon asked one of his men named Joseph to give an order to all the dioceses in the San Fluve Empire to look for the boy without the shadow. He said they should eliminate the boy because he was not human. After a week's holiday in Mercia, Pharma didn't expect the pharmacy to be busier than before. Shortly after, he saw two men who looked suspicious, and when he approached them, they just walked away. Pharma then discussed the two suspicious men with Ellen and the others. She thought that the two mysterious men might be interested in Pharma while explaining that the white robes the two mysterious men were wearing looked different from the guilds in town. Ellen added that they looked like priests from a church outside the empire. After that, Pharma and the others discussed it with the guards so they would be more alert, so nothing happened to the customers. The next day, when a guard was about to open the pharmacy's gate, suddenly, a horse-drawn carriage barged into the pharmacy. The guard rushed to report this to Bruno, who became furious that a group of people was trying to disrupt his son's business. Not only that, this can endanger the safety of his family and those around the pharmacy. Bruno intends to report the incident to the Queen because he has a hunch that they not only intend to destroy Pharma's pharmacy, but harm his youngest son. Bruno then asked Pharma if he suspected anyone because the attack was a declaration of war on the de Medicis family. Actually, Pharma thought of Veron, the chief apothecary, as well as the white-robed people who had come to the pharmacy a few days ago. However, Pharma did not tell this to his father because making accusations without evidence is not good. He replied that he would find out. His father advised Pharma to stay alert because their enemies would not hesitate to use various methods to destroy the de Medicis family. After that, Pharma rushed to the pharmacy and found a ravaged pharmacy after the incident. Even so, he was relieved that no one was injured. Cedric then told Pharma that he had asked Ellen and Lot to bring some of the medicines to Medique so that they could still deliver medicine to consumers if a customer came that day. James suddenly came to the pharmacy along with several young men willing to help Pharma clean up the place. James said that the youth liked to see candy at Pharma's pharmacy. Knowing that someone is willing to help him, Pharma is very grateful. Besides that, several residents who live near the pharmacy came to help him. Not long after, a woman suddenly came to the pharmacy and asked Pharma to check on her father's condition, who had been unconscious for a long time due to the heat. Hearing this, everyone helping him at the pharmacy ordered him to help the woman. Cedric says the same thing and assures Pharma that he can keep an eye on everyone working. Soon after, Pharma took his medical equipment box and rode a horse to the woman's house, which was far from the city. On the way, the woman pointed to a meadow that forced them to continue their journey on foot. When Pharma was about to ask again for the direction of the intended location and looked back, it turned out that the woman had disappeared. Not long after, Pharma was suddenly surrounded by a group of men wearing white robes led by Solomon. He realized that Solomon and his men may have ordered the woman to frame him. Solomon then asks about Pharma's identity while confirming that Pharma is the boy his subordinates mentioned a while ago, then informs him that he and his group are the Inquisitors of the Diocese of Panactios, the leading religious order of the Saint-Fleuve Empire. Pharma then remembered Ellen's words about the Diocese of Panactios, which had even more authority in the religious field than the Queen. They determined the protector gods and sacred techniques for the newborns and gave them peerages. In addition, there is a group within the order whose job is eradicating evil spirits and heretical people, such as Solomon and his group. Solomon accuses Pharma of being an evil spirit disguised as a boy. Pharma denies this and says that he is human. But Solomon didn't believe his words and ordered his men to form a magic seal Pharma could easily break. Pharma then tries to convince Solomon and his group that he is not an evil spirit, but they still attack him in every way possible. But he can easily fend off all of their attacks. Seeing that Pharma's strength exceeds that of an ordinary human, Solomon orders his men to kill him. At first, Pharma didn't want to fight back, but because the people were stubborn, he finally used his strength to make Solomon fall from his horse. Not long after, God Yakutani suddenly appeared as Pharma, who told them to stop attacking him because he came to this world not to fight but to use his power to heal others. At the same time, Solomon and company noticed the sacred mark on Pharma's arm, a sacred symbol of a god of limitless power. Solomon and his group soon realized that the shadowless body and the sacred symbol of the Yakutani god were proof that Pharma was actually an incarnation of a god. The appearance of the Yakutani god had made the men in white robes wake up and knelt in front of Pharma after knowing that the figure before them was a god. Solomon then confessed his sin because he had presumptuously attacked the god. As punishment, Solomon was ready to die because the wound from falling from his horse could not be healed, so sooner or later he would definitely die. Solomon then asked Pharma for permission to make amends with his life on the spot. Pharma, who has returned to his human form, prevents him from ending his life, saying that he wants Solomon and his group to live and no longer bother him and his pharmacy. Pharma explained that he did not want bloodshed because of the incident. He then uses his divine eye to see Solomon's wound. Due to the incident, Solomon's upper shins cracked and oozed blood from being hit when he fell from a horse. Seeing that Solomon's injuries were quite severe, Pharma intended to operate on him before the wound became infected and could endanger his life. Pharma made Solomon take antibiotics to prevent infection. Then he injected anesthetic into the back, cleaned the wound, and cut out the tissue that was no longer working. After that, Pharma stitched up the wound and covered it with a bandage. Pharma asked Solomon and his group to keep everything a secret because he didn't want to cause a stir. Then they agreed to keep it a secret, thank Pharma for not punishing them, and save him. Pharma then said they didn't need to think about that because as someone who studied pharmacy and medicine, it was normal that he saved many people's lives. A few months later, Ellen tells Pharma that a newly appointed head pastor came to the pharmacy, and it turned out to be Solomon, who wanted to thank Pharma and give him a present. Solomon then told Pharma that he had sent a report to the leadership of the Diocese of Panactios that there was no sign of straying in Saint-Louv and that there had never been a boy without a shadow. Hearing that, Pharma thanked Solomon and was greatly relieved that now no one had suspected him anymore. Solomon said that he had come to apologize and thank Pharma and wanted to give him a stick. The stick is one of the treasures of the Diocese of Panactios, which is called the god of pharmacy's staff. Besides being able to help the user fight, the stick can be used to diagnose and become a medium for healing. When Pharma held the stick that Solomon had given him, the stick gave off a light, indicating that the god of pharmacy's staff had acknowledged Pharma. Seeing that Ellen was fascinated by the stick, Pharma asked Ellen to hold the stick. However, Ellen couldn't touch the stick at all. Solomon told him that the god of pharmacy's wand was not from this world, and only the incarnation of the god of pharmacy could use it. That's why the stick cannot be touched by human hands. Even Pharma was still amazed that the pharmaceutical god's scepter could float after he infused divine power into it. On the other hand, it turns out that the perpetrator who crashed the horse-drawn carriage into the pharmacy is still a mystery because Solomon never asked anyone to do this. Before Solomon could take his leave, he handed Pharma another round shape. Solomon explains it is a divine suppression charm that he can use to cover up his disorder so that Pharma can have a shadow when walking in the sun. Pharma looked happy to have it because he had always wanted to walk with his little sister and Lot during the day. While Pharma is waiting for his younger sister and Lot to finish shopping, he plans to add new employees as his pharmacy becomes increasingly crowded daily. Unfortunately, he found it difficult to find noble pharmacists, whereas the experienced commoner pharmacists had already been registered with the Apothecaries Guild, making it impossible to recruit them. Not far from where Pharma was waiting, there was a pharmacy. He saw a pharmacist explaining to a female customer that the pharmacy did not sell the same medicines as the otherworldly pharmacy. The woman found it difficult to get medicine at the pharmacy because it was always busy. Not long after, the pharmacy manager named Pierre explained that they couldn't sell medicines like those the otherworld pharmacy sold because the pharmacist union had not given permission to sell them. Since there was only one apothecaries guild in the city that issued licenses for selling commoners' medicine, the commoners' pharmacists couldn't do much, and he couldn't oppose the policies of the apothecaries guild Veron chaired. Hearing this, Pharma told Ellen that he wanted to form a medicine mixing guild so that commoners' pharmacies could sell their pharmacy's newly concocted medicines. Ellen answered that currently, the otherworld pharmacy already has a subsidiary, namely Medique, which means that he has met the requirements for forming a pharmacist union under regulations. Once the guild is formed, other pharmacies can later join their guild and sell the medicines they concoct. Ellen hopes that the pharmacist union documents that Pharma will submit can be approved so that visitors at the otherworld pharmacy can be reduced and the workload of the employees will be lighter. A few days later, Veron was visibly irritated that the otherworldly pharmacy had grown and become increasingly crowded with people. In front of his members, he said it couldn't continue because the medicine in the otherworldly pharmacy was too cheap, even the poor could afford it. Vernon chimed in and said that it was possible that the pharma apothecary used sacred techniques or used the money from his father, who was a world-renowned royal pharmacist, and from the queen. Hearing Veron's complaints, Fred, who was in the room, judged that Veron was the mastermind behind the horse-drawn carriage incident that broke into the otherworld pharmacy. He asked Sam, a fellow member of the union next to him, and Sam said yes. Sam added that Veron was angry before the pharmacy was officially opened. Then, in front of the forum, Veron said that the otherworldly pharmacy's pharmacy was a source of trouble for them, so they should be able to get rid of it. Because of that, he forbade all members of his guild from approaching the otherworldly pharmacy. If someone violates it, he will be expelled from the union, and his business license will be confiscated. During the day, it was seen that Pierre took his daughter to Dr. Donald. Pharma, who happened to be passing by, informed him that the clinic was closed until next week and asked about Mary's condition, which was being held by him. Pierre accidentally saw the royal pharmacist's badge and looked away from Pharma. Realizing this, he introduces himself as the pharmacist from the otherworldly pharmacy and offers to check on Mary. At first, Pierre refused, but after seeing Mary's alarming condition, he finally nodded slowly. After that, Lot rushed over to prepare the inspection site. Arriving at the pharmacy, Pharma led Pierre through the pharmacy's back door. In the examination room, Pharma, wearing his mask, asked Pierre to put Mary on the bed. After that, he asked Pierre to wear a mask. Pierre was confused and asked about the items that Pharma gave him. Calmly, he explained that the item was a mask to protect people from contracting a disease. Pierre then chimed in by asking whether masks are the same as items for an antidote to disease. Hearing that, Pharma only replied that masks had such a function. As it turns out, another reason Pharma brought him in through the back door was to keep other customers from getting it. Mary's examination began when Pharma asked Pierre several questions about her condition. Pharma then said that Mary had a high fever, was dehydrated, and was weak. He asked whether Mary had any seizures at night or not. Pierre, admiring Pharma's thoroughness while examining his daughter, came to his senses and replied that Mary had had a seizure for about 2 to 3 minutes. Next, he weighed her by calculating the difference between the weight of Pierre, who was carrying Mary, and his weight. Pharma explained that Mary's weight would help her determine the right dosage of the drug because if the dose was not correct, the medicine would not be effective or could have side effects. When Pharma checked Mary's temperature, Pierre paused and realized that common folk pharmacists like his guild usually determine the dosage for young children by giving half the adult dose. Shortly after his daydream, Pierre was surprised to see Pharma using his divine eye to diagnose Mary. Then he informed Mary that there was no abnormality in her brain. Pierre, who was curious, asked whether what Pharma was doing was a holy technique or not. He only answered briefly in the affirmative and told Pierre that Mary only had a common cold that was bad enough. Pierre was surprised because she had a fever to the point of convulsions and foaming at the mouth and thought she was possessed by an evil spirit. Pharma shook his head. He explained that the severe fever was caused by the influenza virus attacking Mary's body. Since she had only been showing symptoms for a day, Pharma gave her a medicine she had to inhale through her nose because it would not work very well if she swallowed it. By inhaling, the drug will directly lead to the respiratory tract, where the pathogen develops. Pharma continued his explanation and said that the fever in Mary's body was caused because her body was eliminating the pathogens of the disease. However, constant fever is bad because it will drain her energy, so Pharma provides a fever-reducing drug, namely paracetamol. At night, Pierre is amazed that the medicine from Pharma will work so quickly, and he thanks Pharma for helping him. He provides medicine for 5 days because the pharmacy is closed. He added that if Mary's condition worsened, she asked Pierre not to hesitate to tell the pharmacy's gatekeeper because Pharma would be willing to check on her even if it was at night. Then Pharma added that he wanted to help people seeking medical help at night. Pierre asked the total fee he had to pay and said he promised to pay it later. Pharma replied that Pierre only had to pay for 1 loaf, which surprised him because it was so cheap. Pharma was frank if he gave a low price so it would be easier for children to get tested. After Pierre walked out of the pharmacy gates, he finally understood why the guild couldn't compete with him. At Pierre's house, his wife came and asked about their daughter's condition, who had fallen asleep. Upon learning that the potent drug was from an aristocrat's pharmacy, she was shocked that this was against the rules of the society. But he had no other choice. If he had not been helped by Pharma, Mary might not have survived. Pierre said the pharmacy was extraordinary because the owner had extensive knowledge and was very friendly to patients. That's the real pharmacist. Pierre is a pharmacist and has experience and confidence in his knowledge. But when compared to Pharma, a commoner like Pierre couldn't use sacred techniques and didn't have access to a wealth of medicinal knowledge. He wished that Pharma knowledge could be shared with him. However, his wife worries about her husband's fate if he opposes the pharmacist union. Seeing that her husband looked troubled, she tried to calm him down, saying that there was nothing wrong with Pierre obeying the union like now because Mary was still small, so they had to avoid things that would threaten their survival. They remembered the debt from opening the shop, making his wife very sad. The next day at the union meeting, Veron is still disillusioned by the drop in sales at all stores. They talked about Pharma's pharmacy, which has opened a cosmetic shop branch and is preparing to add a 3rd branch. It turns out that Pierre's wife has been secretly buying Pharma's cosmetics recently. Because of that, Pierre has punished her. One member of the union said that cosmetics were so famous that female customers were very interested in these cosmetic products. It wasn't just the female customers. The newly appointed head priest was reported to have visited the otherworldly pharmacy. On the other hand, Pierre, who heard the conversation, was silent. Seeing Pierre, who looked silent, Veron asked his opinion about the otherworldly pharmacy. Moreover, that Pierre's pharmacy was the pharmacy that suffered the most because it was very close to the otherworldly pharmacy. Finally, Pierre asked everyone in the room if anyone had ever been to Pharma's pharmacy and seen their medicines. Of course, everyone said they didn't want to go there because it was their rival. Pierre suggested they visit him as he had done to find out why customers were reluctant to return to their pharmacies. Then Veron was very surprised to hear this confession because one of his members had already been to Pharma's pharmacy. Pierre explained that the pharmacy owner had helped cure his daughter. He told Veron that the otherworldly pharmacy did not discriminate against commoners or nobles, rich or poor. They all received the same treatment and proper medicines. Upon hearing that, Veron became annoyed and said that even though the pharmacy owner's knowledge was very extensive, it didn't mean that his method was correct because Pharma used the Queen's authority to set prices arbitrarily and cheat their way of doing business. Veron confirmed that it was just a ploy by the nobles who always looked down on the commoners. A few years ago, Veron looked sad when he had to lose his daughter because his holy technique had a limit. When he wanted to ask the aristocrats for help, they raised the price of the precious medicine to be very expensive. Because none of the nobles wanted to save his daughter, in the end, Veron had to watch his daughter die. Soon after, an enraged Vernon says that the common people's healthcare infrastructure will be destroyed if the otherworldly pharmacy is allowed to operate. Therefore, they had to get rid of the pharmacy. However, Pierre persisted with the thought that they should not get rid of the otherworldly pharmacy but instead learn from it. Vernon, who heard this, was getting angry because Pierre said that. Pierre again said that if they were selling drugs whose efficacy was unclear, it would be the same as deceiving customers. According to him, it is a disgrace for pharmacists. However, Veron seemed to have lost his temper when Pierre explained the special features of Pharma's pharmacy, and told him to leave the guild if Pierre wanted it. The next day, Pierre sat sadly in front of his ravaged pharmacy. Just then, Pharma passed by the store. Seeing him sitting in front of his pharmacy, Pharma realized that Pierre was the pharmacy's owner and asked what had happened. Pierre explained that he was no longer the pharmacy owner after he told the pharmacist union how to examine Mary. Because of that, the drugs and business permits were confiscated. Feeling guilty, Pharma then apologizes because Pierre's pharmacy has been destroyed. Pierre said there was no need for Pharma to apologize. Instead, he was impressed with Pharma's medicine and pharmacy that he wanted to change. However, the union kicked him out, so he couldn't do business in his country. Pierre thought of moving to another country and starting from scratch because it was his only path. Pharma asked if Pierre could do business again if he joined another guild. Pierre agreed, but he said that the guild for pharmacists in this country was just the Pharmacy Guild of Commoners, so they should join the guild to do business. Pharma, which already has a new guild called the Medicine Compounding Guild, finally tells Pierre and invites him to join his guild, which sells new medicines. Hearing that, he was happy and willing to join. Time passed, and Pierre finally had his shop back, and that day was the opening of his shop. He was a little worried whether any customers would come to his shop because his shop was not the otherworldly pharmacy that Pharma managed. However, after his daughter encouraged him, Pierre decided to open his new pharmacy. Unexpectedly, many people were waiting outside the pharmacy because they discovered that it was the first pharmacy to partner with the Otherworld Pharmacy, where all the medicines sold were the same. Seeing the customers lining up in front of his pharmacy, Pierre burst into tears. The scene then switches to the past, which shows a genius man named Camus undergoing trial. The judges at the trial had no idea that Camus, who had created many medical innovations, had conducted such horrific experiments. Bruno, who was still young at the time, did not expect Camus to tell him that he did not understand that no matter how much medicine he invented, humans would still die. But no matter how many humans die, they will give birth to new humans. At that time, Camus was punished for repeatedly carrying out horrific experiments on humans. In the present, Bruno opened his eyes and realized it was a dream. After breakfast, Pharma saw something different about his father and asked about his condition. Briefly, Bruno replied that he was fine and was just thinking of something. Moments later, Simon arrives with a letter from Pal. Knowing it was a letter from her eldest son, Beatrice was enthusiastic and thought Pal would be home soon. However, the letter's contents apparently reported that he had decided to postpone his return. Then Blanche asked if her eldest brother was very busy. Pharma, who heard his younger sister's question, replied that Pal might be busy studying to finish college. Bruno then asks Pharma to come into his room, where he tells Pharma that next month there will be St. Fleuve's Fair, the biggest trading event which will be held once a year for 1 month, and merchants from all over the world will gather in the imperial capital. Because of that, he reminded Pharma to be more careful about a strange epidemic troubling Vant Island, a neighboring colony of the Netherlands. Based on a letter from Pal, at least 1,000 people have died from this deadly disease. Hearing that, Pharma was surprised and asked if it was an endemic disease or maybe it came from poison. Unfortunately, Bruno himself did not know the details. The best research team from the Nova at Louvre Academy had brought their samples for study, but instead, 2 of the researchers were infected and became victims because of the high transmission rate. Bruno again explained that the epidemic would only end after all the colonies died. However, there will be a Dutch merchant ship carrying goods from the island for the fair later, which means there is likely to be contaminated cargo coming to the imperial capital through the port of Mercia, a territory of the de Medicis family. Pharma then proceeded to ask about the remains of the researchers or their surviving samples for further investigation. Bruno reread the contents of Pal's letter, which informed him that the sacred fire technique had destroyed all the bodies and samples. All samples of his corpse had turned to ashes and left nothing. Pharma thinks that viruses and bacteria are weak against heat, but the actions that had been taken showed that even the highest authorities in the world considered the situation to be out of control because the development of this disease was clearly not normal. In his letter, Pal told how a researcher suddenly experienced a high fever followed by headaches and vomiting after researching disease samples. On his neck and armpits appeared lumps. After that, he fell into a coma and died on the 7th day after the appearance of the first symptoms. Meanwhile, another researcher experienced a critical condition faster, and his skin turned pitch black before dying. After the death of the 2 researchers, their laboratory was sealed, and visits to the island were banned. Bruno then tells Pharma that Nova at Louvre University has an unknown revolutionary device, a microscope that Pharma has built. Because there may have been a sample sketch of the disease, he finally asked his father to ask for the sketch. Meanwhile, in the palace, it appeared that a minister reported to the queen about the reduction in the death rate due to disease in the imperial capital by 20%. This is thanks to the performance of the Otherworld Pharmacy and the Drug Composer Union, whose partners continue to grow. Apart from that, they have safer cosmetics and carry out regular health outreach to increase citizen awareness to prevent disease. Several ministers expressed that the performance of the otherworldly pharmacy was truly astonishing, while another minister argued that if the achievements were in every region, then the empire's prosperity would be unshakable. Hearing that, the queen ridiculed the minister because, at first, he was one of the ministers who rejected the otherworldly pharmacy because it was run by the young boy, but now he was praising Pharma instead. With Pharma's outstanding performance, the queen considered awarding him the Archduke title. However, a female minister who was there informed her that Pharma was underage, whereas the empire's own regulations forbade minors from receiving it. Finally, the queen postponed conferring the title of Archduke to Pharma until he had met the regulatory requirements. She suspected that Pharma possessed abilities beyond those of ordinary humans, so she would help him more easily access all the facilities that would assist him. The queen wished that the empire's prosperity could last forever. The next day, Pharma told Ellen about a deadly disease that could threaten the safety of the residents. In fact, the fair will be held in 2 weeks, so they can no longer stop cargo from the Netherlands. While they were still discussing how to deal with this, Lot suddenly came with a letter from Pal for Pharma. After looking at the sketches of the disease his brother sent him, Pharma soon realized that the deadly disease was the Black Death. At noon, Ellen sent her disciples to Mercia to give Pharma instructions to Governor Adam. She told him to prepare all the necessities to build a quarantine place in Mercia. Then Pharma advised them to be careful when inspecting cargo from the Netherlands. If a crew member is infected, the crew member must be isolated. Soon after, Ellen and Pharma meet with Bruno to discuss the mysterious pathogen. Judging from the symptoms of blackened skin, swollen lymph nodes, and the appearance of bacteria in the sketch, Pharma concluded that the plague was the Black Death. Bruno agreed with his son even though he had only read about it in literature. He realized that the Black Death occurred about 200 years ago and was deadly. The Black Plague, or Pest Plague, is a deadly disease transmitted by rodent fleas. On Earth, this plague has occurred many times. Even in the 14th century, the plague reduced the population of Europe by half. The death rate from pest outbreaks alone reaches 50 to 70%, whereas if the pathogen has caused pneumonia, it is certain that the patient will die. Pharma thought that the disease was a disease that could be the worst nightmare in human history because it could recur even though it had been eradicated. Bruno then tells about a ship that had been docked at Vant Island, which was going to the imperial capital. Pharma said that he had instructed Governor Adam to build a quarantine area at Mercia Harbor. Soon after, Ellen's students, who could teach how to check for the plague, were sent to Mercia to begin the quarantine plan. Seeing his father looking desperate, Pharma assured him that they would be able to save people because he had prepared a drug called levofloxacin. This antibiotic was quite effective against the bacteria that caused the Black Death. For now, only Pharma can make it, but he has asked partner pharmacies to prepare the needed doses. Their first mission is to prevent anyone from getting infected. However, because preventing disease outbreaks is not easy, Bruno goes to the palace with Ellen and Pharma. After listening to their explanation, the Empress instructed to partially close the gates leading to the imperial capital and tighten security on trade routes by setting up checkpoints. Shortly after, Pharma begged the Queen for checkpoints to be set up in strategic locations. He added that the pharmacists from the Drug Composers Union were ready to cooperate. Besides that, because the Black Plague was transmitted to humans through fleas from rats, they had to cut the transmission route by asking residents to exterminate rats and get rid of fleas by cleaning their clothes by boiling them. Then the Queen said she would announce all these suggestions and ask her ministers to prepare everything. Elsewhere, Pharma is teaching Pierre about compound microscopy, which can reduce the risk of samples coming into contact with the eyes or mouth of the researcher. Afterward, Pharma asked Pierre about preparing his new drug. Then he said that there were no problems with the preparation. The refined ingredients from Pharma have been made sufficient for 1,000 patients. The quarantine post has also received the drug. It is said that if someone is infected, the drug will be given for free. Shortly after, Pharma reminded that if the bacteria infects the lungs, the transmission can be through the mouth, and the droplets will spread faster. Because of that, he asked Pierre to give medicine to anyone who needed it. On the other hand, the Queen asked the Minister of Finance about the preparations for the Fair of St. Fleuve. The minister replied that the preparations were going well and there were no problems. He said the businessmen of the Imperial Trade Union had already prepared their wares, and merchants from overseas kept coming. Meanwhile, Salomon had gathered his members, who were possessors of the Holy Wind technique, to increase security with purification magic. Then the Queen requested that the Fair of St. Fleuve put security first and still be held despite risking the Empire's dignity. Meanwhile, Pharma and Ellen were preparing to leave for Mercia City. At the same time, Camus was seen, covered in a black aura, walking past several unconscious people and saw several rats crawling at his feet. Not long after, Pharma and Ellen had finally reached Mercia Harbor. He asked Ellen to inspect all ships before the fair started. Shortly after, Ellen's students greeted them and reported that all ships from overseas had been inspected according to Pharma's directions. They then provided a list of items on board and the results of the crew's health checks. After that, the ships that have passed the inspection, the goods will be purified by the Holy Wind technique before being lowered. If someone is tested negative but is suspected of being exposed, they will be directed to the isolation room. Using a small boat, Pharma and Ellen inspected the ship that was about to dock at the port. They checked the crew members one by one to make sure they were not exposed to the disease. The ship captain they met seemed impatient and angry because he wanted to get permission to unload the goods. Pharma apologized and informed him that the inspection was carried out to prevent the transmission of dangerous disease outbreaks. After carrying out the inspection, he asked the ship's captain to submit the inspection results to the officers at the checkpoint. He submitted prescriptions for some of the ship's crew members who showed early symptoms of the deadly disease. Pharma told them to take the vitamins provided at the Mercer Port quarantine post. Soon after, Pharma and Ellen continued their inspection of other ships and were surprised by a ship captain, who was annoyed because he had been waiting for so long and wanted to unload his belongings. On the other hand, another ship's captain looked angry and asked Pharma to inspect his ship first. The two captains of the ship were arguing with each other from their respective boats. They get annoyed when they have to obey Pharma, who they think was just a kid, and protest because they fear that the merchandise they carry will actually be damaged and cause them losses. During the protest, suddenly, a gunshot was heard coming from the Red Fleet ship St. Fleuve. Then the captain of the Red Fleet ship warned the captains that all ships that had entered the St. Fleuve Empire harbor area had to follow the rules. Shortly after, Pharma and Ellen realized that the captain of the Red Fleet is their customer, James. James then continued that Pharma was the royal pharmacist as well as the son of the Lord of Mercer, who directly conducted inspections in that country. James said he would not hesitate to fire cannons at the ship if anyone dared to protest. The ship's captains who received their warnings became afraid and finally apologized. Pharma, who had boarded the Red Fleet, thanked James. James commented that he and his crew would help Pharma so that the inspection process at the port would run smoothly. During the day at the checkpoint, Ellen tells Pharma that she thought the Black Death only existed in legendary books and is grateful for his presence. Not long after, Governor Adam suddenly came and told him that many residents of Elstark Village were dying after experiencing a high fever. The village is a small fishing village to the west, which is used as an illegal passage by ships from overseas wishing to enter Mercer without having to follow time-consuming inspection procedures. Hearing that, Ellen was surprised. Then she asked where the people who had entered illegally were. Unfortunately, Adam did not know because they had already left the village. Meanwhile, the situation in the village looked worrisome. At first, some people had a fever, which was considered a common disease. But after many people died, the disease spread rapidly. In the end, Pharma decided to go to the village alone. Dressed in a protective suit, Pharma rushed outside to head to the village. Seeing this, Ellen went after him because she was worried about him. She says that only Pharma can accurately diagnose the Black Death and inspect the port. Then Pharma assured her that she could also conduct inspections because the port was equipped with medical facilities, medicines, and experienced medical personnel. After saying that, Pharma mounted his staff and hurried off to Elstark Village. On the way, Pharma thought that the most likely source of infection was a rat hiding in the cargo. However, it is now difficult to identify it because it has happened. He wonders where the ship carrying the people has gone because he has to purify the ship and save the crew. Otherwise, the crew's lives will not be saved. While Pharma was preoccupied with his thoughts, he accidentally crashed into a tree, but surprisingly, he and the staff could penetrate it just like that. Not wanting the incident to happen again, Pharma focused on flying more safely and faster so he could reach the village before the death toll from the disease increased. From above, Pharma saw several villagers rushing away because they feared that they could all be killed by evil spirits if they stayed in the village. Soon after, they land in front of the villagers and tell them to return to the village. However, the residents insisted on leaving the village because many people had died there. The residents who thought that Pharma was an evil spirit that had cursed their village then prepared to attack him with the weapons they had. Shortly after, Pharma tries to persuade the villagers that they will not survive if the source of the disease is not removed, even if they leave the village. However, as the villagers persisted in his stance, Pharma finally stamped his staff on the ground and sealed the village with ice to prevent the disease from spreading. After that, Pharma introduced himself as a pharmacist from the imperial capital who had come to save the citizens from a deadly disease called the Black Death. The citizens who saw a badge on his clothes finally realized the boy standing in front of them was the palace pharmacist who managed to heal the queen. To convince the residents, Pharma informed them that he had brought medicine to cure the residents who were suffering from this deadly disease. Upon hearing that, the residents finally agreed to return to the village and fight together to suppress the spread of this deadly disease. Before administering treatment and quarantine to people exposed to the deadly disease, Pharma explained to the residents that he would separate the village into 3 areas, namely an area for residents who experienced severe symptoms, an area for residents who were exposed but still had mild symptoms, an area for residents who are not exposed to the disease. This was done to facilitate the selection of patients to be treated first and to prevent the spread of the disease. Meanwhile, the Red Fleet notices a suspicious ship sailing away from its designated route. Then James assumed that the ship was a smuggler's ship. Soon after, a crew member assigned to see the smuggling ship through binoculars suddenly screamed because he saw that everyone on board had died. Knowing this, one of the crew members asked whether they needed to investigate the ship or not. However, James rejected the idea because the ship could be threatened and contract the disease. Then he decided to sink the smuggler's ship because, most likely, no one was left alive on the ship. The decision to sink the ship had to be made because the smuggler's ship was carrying a plague that was more dangerous than pirates. James was again instructed to sink the ship completely so that no part drifted ashore. In the village of Elstark, the first drug distribution has been completed, and it looks like everyone is happy. Currently, residents who have not received medication have severe symptoms, and Pharma plans to come to the area tomorrow. The following day, several pharmacists from the village wanted to accompany Pharma to the treatment center for people with severe symptoms, but he refused and said that health workers must prioritize their own safety. He reassured them that he had put on a protective suit and asked the pharmacists to remain there to treat other residents whose condition was not too critical. Not long after that, Pharma arrived at the location of the patients in critical condition who had previously been quarantined. The scene then switches and shows two men named Jack and Ed, who are seen discussing that they don't have enough energy and time to do their job at a pharmacy school. Jack then had an idea for them to ask the principal to add more employees. At the same time, Professor Casper overheard the conversation and offered to help them. However, Jack emphatically replied that they did not need her help and left her alone. On the other hand, Professor Casper looked sad after being ignored by the two men she wanted to help. Sometime later, Professor Casper was reading a book using special glasses in her room. Not long after, a girl came to see her. She seemed to know that Professor Casper was rudely rejected after trying to help two boys, so she went to Professor Casper to ask how she was. Professor Casper then said she would turn 60 next year and felt that it was normal that people would not want to be helped by a retiring old woman. Professor Casper added that her specialty is a taxonomy of fungi and microorganisms, a field not related to compounding drugs. The girl then told Professor Casper that she had helped a lot in research and drug development. In the middle of the conversation, someone told her that the headmaster had summoned Professor Casper to his room. Then she suddenly thought about whether she will be retiring soon. In Elstark Village, Pharma enters a building where people who have been stricken with a deadly disease and have severe symptoms have gathered. A medic wearing a head covering suddenly appears and bans him from entering because he thinks Pharma is an ordinary boy. However, another medical officer told him Pharma was not an ordinary little boy. The officer approached Pharma and said it was an honor for him to be able to meet Pharma again, and surprisingly, he turned out to be one of Salomon's men. Shortly after, Pharma explained that his purpose in coming there was to treat patients, so he was invited in by the medical staff. Pharma, who saw the number of patients in that place, had a hard time detecting which people were infected and which were not. He thought he could not cure them with his knowledge and the drug he concocted, levofloxacin. However, he kept pushing himself and tried his best. After that, Pharma instructed medics to administer the drug to all patients. Meanwhile, he would examine each patient using his divine eye and found 12 patients had contracted the Black Death, while 2 others had not, and 1 had died. To treat the 12 infected patients, Pharma administered the drug levofloxacin and found that most of the infections that had spread in the patients' bodies had disappeared, so their chances of recovery were quite high. Not only that, Pharma informed the medics that one patient had a fever due to the flu, not caused by the Black Death. After taking medicine and changing clothes, the patient is allowed to leave the quarantine area and is asked to follow the directions of the village pharmacist in an area that is not infected. However, the patient could only leave the quarantine area after completing a period of isolation for several days. On the other hand, Pharma used his sacred technique to increase the effectiveness of his medicine. With many patients in the area, Pharma realized that he still lacked medical personnel to continue treatment. As he looked at the church where the plague patients were treated through the window, Pharma felt that it was beyond the capabilities of ordinary pharmacists and medicine. Though, as time passed, the Black Death drew closer to the imperial capital. A moment later, the medics informed Pharma that the drug distribution to the patients had finished, and they asked what else they could do to help him. Pharma suddenly remembered the ship's crew carrying the Black Plague heading to the imperial capital. He asked them to find the crew, burn the cargo, and give medicine to those infected, while Pharma himself will follow after he treats the patients there. Switching back to the pharmacy school, Professor Casper is seen meeting Bruno, who turns out to be the principal of the pharmacy school. It turned out that Bruno called her to discuss her research. However, she thought that Bruno would end her research sooner, so she begged him so she could finish her research first before retiring. Hearing this, Bruno denied it because that was not what he wanted to talk about. He didn't plan to fire Professor Casper, but he wanted to give her an important job to save the world. Hearing that, Professor Casper was shocked and felt that she could not save the world. However, Bruno explained that this work was included in her area of expertise. Then he asks her to find a new microorganism and extract a substance that can be used as a medicine to cure the Black Plague and other infectious diseases. While looking at Bruno's paper, Professor Casper wonders who wrote about these microorganisms in detail. She was even more surprised because there was an inscription on Actinobacteria, the microorganism requested by Bruno, which turned out to have been developed many years ago. In Professor Casper's laboratory, Bruno sees the actinobacteria she developed. However, she still doesn't believe that the microorganisms she developed can be used as new medicines. Seeing this work, Bruno praised her. Starting that day, Bruno gave a special budget to Professor Casper so that she could focus more on developing new drugs from these microorganisms. He then said that it seemed that Professor Casper had to postpone retirement. Initially, many people looked down upon Professor Casper and researchers in the same field, but now she could not be underestimated. Like Pharma, who has expertise because of an incarnation of a god and an outsider from the modern world, Professor Casper is a native of that world, assisted by existing equipment and knowledge, can find a magnifying glass and mushroom microorganisms, then conduct research that can save human life. In Elstark Village, the villagers thank Pharma and the priests for returning after treating patients with severe symptoms. He asked residents to stay in the village for 2 weeks to increase the effectiveness of the treatment. Moreover, the area inside the ice wall was protected by holy techniques to be safe. He asked residents to kill rats or fleas that entered the village. Anyone who is forced to leave the village should never touch the animals. Not long after, Pharma saw a puff of smoke coming from the crew of the smuggling boat, who had apparently been abandoned by their comrades because they had a high fever. He asked about the number of carts and the cargo they were carrying. However, they didn't answer and instead asked why he was in that place. Fortunately, Pharma is not offended by the question and reveals that they have the Black Plague. That's why he comes. Pharma said if they answer the questions, they will be given medicine because, without the medicine, their condition will worsen, and they will eventually die. Pharma asked again whether they wanted to answer his question or not. Finally, they replied that there were 2 carts laden with cloth, one with spices and another with rare white squirrels from Vant Island. From the smugglers' answers, Pharma concluded that the rodents could spread the Black Plague. He remembered his father's words that Vant Island was where the Black Plague appeared. Afterward, Pharma continued his interrogation and discovered that the number of people who went to the imperial capital consisted of 24 workers and 5 holy knights, an army of holy technique users serving the royal or noble families. Hearing the smuggler's explanation, Pharma grew even more suspicious that the holy knights who came from the place of the plague had deliberately brought the plague to the imperial capital. He remembered the White Death disease that once attacked the queen and could not find the source of the infection. Pharma suspects that it is another plot to destroy the empire by sending an even more vicious Black Plague. After telling everything, the smugglers finally got the promised drug. Meanwhile, Pharma orders the medics to hand over the smugglers to the Empire once they recover for legal trial. At the Imperial Palace, Bruno meets the Queen to tell her about a report from Mercer about an illegal ship carrying disease in the village of Elstark, where the crew had disembarked. They spread a disease resembling the Black Plague and caused many fatalities. Since the crew's goal was to go to St. Fleuve, the Queen and Bruno expected their arrival between today and tomorrow. Knowing that she was silent, she ordered tightened security and checks at all gates, especially at Gate 6, which leads to Mercer. The next day, Lot is seen distributing masks to residents while one of the officers at the checkpoint brings the latest sample from Gate 6 to Pierre. After examining the sample, Pierre quickly realized that it looked exactly like what Pharma had told him. Pierre asked the officer to go to Gate 6 and quarantine the arrivals because samples of the Black Death were found in them. Suddenly, there was an explosion from the direction of Gate 6, and it turned out that the gate had been destroyed, and someone suspected of being a holy knight broke through the gate. Knowing this, Pierre asked his comrades to hurry up and protect the medicines. A moment later, he saw the intruder carrying a cage containing the white squirrel, which had now been unleashed with the divine whirlwind technique. The attack then left the checkpoint at Gate 6 in ruins. Pierre, who knew that squirrels were rodents that could carry the Black Plague, shouted for warning bells to be rung so that the guards would close all houses and shops so that the animals would not enter. Meanwhile, the Queen received a report about the Holy Knights from the Netherlands who had attacked the city. She instructed the royal troops to defeat the 5 Holy Knights. At the same time, Bruno reports about a Dutch smuggler ship possibly carrying the Black Plague and asks the Queen to take a new Black Plague medicine as a precaution. However, she still doesn't know the purpose of the Netherlands in carrying out the attack because that country has long been an ally of the Empire. Bruno thought that the mastermind behind all this was someone who knew about the Black Death because such a plan would not work without knowledgeable people. Soon after, Bruno found out that the Netherlands had recruited a mysterious pharmacist 3 years ago. The pharmacist's characteristics and treatment methods closely resembled the ruthless pharmacist he knew. Bruno then explained that the pharmacist had discovered many new treatment methods and was famous for his genius. However, he repeatedly performs horrific experiments on humans. Because of this, he was arrested by the diocese of Panictios and had his sacred techniques removed, and was exiled as a commoner. Before exiling, the pharmacist conducted experiments on prisoners in prison to research a poison that could be transmitted to everyone, like the plague. A minister argued that the Dutch pharmacist must be related to the death of the previous king, and the person they suspected of being the Dutch pharmacist was none other than Camus, Bruno's former colleague. At Gate 6, the royal soldiers looked overwhelmed by the Holy Knights until finally, Solomon came and released the holy technique of the Holy Knights. Elsewhere, Lot was about to take medicines to the pharmacy, but Cedric stopped her because the situation was dangerous. At the same time, Lot saw that Pharma had returned from Mercer. Then Pharma checked how far the epidemic had spread, and a moment later, he saw his father and came over to him. He reported to Bruno that the inspection in Mercer had been handed over to Ellen. After that, they approached the crowd of Holy Knights who had no strength left. During interrogation, it is revealed that the Knights only carried orders from a man they did not know. It turned out that the 5 of them did not know about the Black Plague. One of the Knights explained that the man had taken the citizens hostage and had the power to kill thousands of people in the blink of an eye because he had been possessed by an evil spirit. After confirming the man's characteristics from the Holy Knights, they finally found out that Camus was the mastermind behind all this. Before the Holy Knights died, they said they had accomplished their task, and now the citizens would be safe. Elsewhere, Lot rushed to the pharmacy after confirming that it was safe. Meanwhile, Pharma plans to go to the pharmacy to make medicine. But then, he saw a black shadow over his pharmacy, so he rushed to the pharmacy. At the same time, not noticing the black shadow, Lot continued to run toward the pharmacy, Cedric behind her. Seeing the pharmacy window open, Lot was sure that Pharma had come home and was in his office. At the same time, the bells were now ringing again. Cedric opened the door of the pharmacy, and Lot went inside. Suddenly, he felt something strange because the gate was unlocked. Before entering the pharmacy, Cedric planned to check it first. However, unaware of his plan, Lot entered the empty Pharma's room. When Cedric came into the room, Camus suddenly paralyzed him. At the same time, Pharma, who had just arrived at the pharmacy, then used his divine eyes and saw that the black shadow was already in his lab. A moment later, Bruno joined Pharma for the lab. On the other hand, Camus, who was in the lab, felt a strong aura coming to that place. Upon arriving at the lab, they saw Cedric and Lot passed out on the floor. Bruno then asked Pharma to help them while he would attract Camus' attention. A battle ensued between Bruno and Camus. Meanwhile, Pharma tries to treat Cedric and Lot and finds poison in their wounds. However, Bruno finally got cornered, and Camus brought a poison vial for his experiments. After healing Cedric and Lot, Pharma rushes after his father. He is visibly angry that Camus has conducted horrific experiments on humans and caused many people to die from the Black Death. Pharma then unleashed his power as the god of pharmacy until, finally, Camus died and was thrown out of the pharmacy. At the same time, a light was coming from the pharmacy, so people saw it. Solomon wondered if it was the Yakusan god's purification light. In legends, the god Yakusan is said to have many abilities, and the most formidable ability is the power of purification. In ancient records, god Yakusan could eliminate evil spirits and stop plagues with his scepter. After that incident, the management and treatment of the Black Plague continued. Soon after, the inspection of merchant ships for the Fair of St. Fleuve that Ellen did prevent the access of disease from the port. On the other hand, Pharma makes an additional dose of levofloxacin for the Black Death. Fortunately, the recovery in the imperial capital is progressing smoothly, and the threat of the Black Plague has receded. The imperial capital's pharmacy school had discovered streptomycin-producing bacteria and antibiotics that were being cultivated. At the same time, vaccines for various infectious diseases continue to be developed. 2 months later, the Queen announced that the threat of the Black Plague was over. Hearing that, people seem happy, and the Otherworld Pharmacy has now reopened. At the end of the anime, it was shown that the door to the Otherworld Pharmacy was opened, and many people had queued and entered to get medicine there. The moral that can be learned from this anime is that evil will never win against good. No matter how big the evil is, good things will ultimately defeat it.